Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Chero Goswami, Chief Information and Digital Officer with Providence. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Chero, thanks for joining me today.
Anthony, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Looking forward to having a fun chat. Let's start off if you want to tell me a little bit about your organization and your role.
Well, I work for Providence St. Joseph's Health System. It's one of the largest not-for-profit health systems in the country. We have over 52 ministries. We call them ministries, which are hospitals across 7 states, mostly on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and then also all the way down to Texas. And we have over 129,000 caregivers, employees. We call them caregivers. So we have the privilege of serving a huge, huge part of the population across our country. And we've been doing this for over 150 years. So it's been a phenomenal opportunity for me to come and continue the mission that was started by the Sisters of Providence and Sisters of St. Joseph in caring the care for those who need the most.
Excellent. And your role, it's a familiar title these days, but if you want to give any color around maybe some of the things under your purview.
Yeah, I think it's a whole different conversation how our titles keep evolving, whether it's transformation, innovation, invention, everything else. I'm just a simple man with a simple title, Anthony, the way I say it. If there's a technology plugged in somewhere, when it doesn't work, it's my problem. Having said that, my role really is to leverage the opportunities and the power of technology to create solutions to provide better patient care and outcomes, and also equally reduce the burden on our caregivers every day. So I always look at technology to say, how am I making a difference versus doing technology for the sake of technology? Now at Providence, and prior to that in other health systems as well.
All right, excellent. Very good. So 6 months in, so that makes this kind of a fun and unique conversation. Starting at a new place, why don't you tell me about going in? What were your thoughts around, there's different things out there, I think, sort of frameworks about an executive starting a new position, things you should accomplish in a certain amount of days and checklists and all these kind of things. Did you go in with anything specific, or was it just sort of a higher level? General idea of things you wanted to do and accomplish and relationships you wanted to start building. Just your thoughts on how you sort of day one, just what do I want to, what's my sort of game plan here?
Yeah, so let me give a little bit of background going further out than 6 months. I did not grow up in healthcare. I grew up in the corporate for-profit telecommunications, consulting, different industries. And so when I came to healthcare, the best lesson I learned was don't judge. Don't judge on day one. And so as I started this organization, I held the bar high for myself that I'm not going to walk in with any bias, because it's always easy to look at something and react in the moment to say, why isn't this working that way? What?
Mm-hmm.
And because I did not grow up in healthcare, I learned healthcare by walking the floors of the clinical areas, because you can see and hear and feel a lot of things through PowerPoint presentations every Monday morning. But you really want to see what's happening, go walk the floors of an ED on a Friday night, or be in an ICU on a given day, and you will see how much technology is used or not used. So it's something that has worked for me, even within organizations when I've worked, taken on additional responsibilities at different roles. I always say, just flush your brain for like a month and just go and absorb and find the lessons, go ask questions. So if I were to simplify this, spend a lot of time with frontline users, validate what their understanding is of the products that our teams are producing by the day, by the minute, and then come back and spend time with the team to understand what their challenges, their opportunities, their limitations are, and eventually, over a period of time, create a roadmap where the sum of all the resources are tried to map to sum of all the expectations of your stakeholders, and then the conversation begins to say, what can you do with what you have? So that's something that has worked for me. I'll call it a playbook. You can
Mm-hmm.
framework. And when I came into Providence, it's very important to note that there is also a very new leadership at Providence. Our CEO stepped into the role about a year ago. We have a new chief operating officer. We have a new chief strategy officer. some promoted from within the company, some from the outside. So we are also taking the time to build our first team over this period of time out here. So that is worthy of being called out.
That's interesting. Right. So kind of a new team coming in and getting to know each other, um, which creates some unique dynamics. Um, so you mentioned the idea of sort of walking the floor, which is obviously very important, very critical. Um, I wonder if a lot of folks who come up in IT, if that's sort of something they need to overcome, because a lot of them maybe aren't extroverts, right? If you come out of network or telecom or infrastructure, you might not be, especially if you weren't in healthcare. Hospitals can be very intimidating. Uh, so it's a great policy. It's a it's very important and fruitful. But I wonder if it's perhaps not that easy, maybe to get started.
A few thoughts here, Anthony. One, for the record, I'm an introvert. My psychological analysis reports will show you I'm an introvert. Two, you said it's not easy. I agree with you. In fact, when we talk about leadership styles, I always say healthcare is not for the easy ones. It's not for the easy ones. It's the only industry where our customers actually don't want to come to us. You go to a restaurant, you choose and you go. You go to a shopping mall, you choose and you go. You go to a vacation, you choose and you go. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, it's a beautiful day, I'll go to the hospital, right? So the easy is the first barrier we have to overcome because we signed up for something that nobody else wants to do. Having said that, the rounding becomes important because we are all professionals. That's a key word. Think of another industry where the professional does not go to perform where it is. A sports person goes and performs in an arena. A musician goes and performs on stage. If our work is practiced on the front lines, how can we understand the value of our work if we don't know how the work is going to be consumed? So there are very valid reasons why people feel uncomfortable. Not that there is blood all over the place or things like that, but it is a
Mhm.
very and the thing that makes things the most uncomfortable is watching human pain,
Yeah.
watching human pain. And yet, I will say, Anthony, that it is one of the greatest teachers I've had in my life. That when you see someone in pain, it motivates you to do things a little better, faster, differently. The next time your phone goes off, you run to the phone instead of walking to the phone. The next time before you go to bed, you run one more check on your database to say it's not going to lock up in the night. Those things don't come naturally until you watch human suffering. And it motivates you. So I have never mandated rounding, never. I've been doing this for 19 years now. My style is more motivation, encouragement. And so as I settle in Providence, as I've done in other places, I will encourage my team members to join me without disrupting clinical care on the front lines to do those roundings.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was just going to ask you that about how you institute that among staff and the IT department, but you don't require it, you encourage it. So that's an interesting approach.
Yeah, because my philosophy is once you start mandating a lot of things, it becomes a chore. Um, so in the past, pre-COVID, when access was a little easier, let's just say, and I've always had an office in a proper hospital, so it was very easy for me to, instead of doing a standard one-on-one sitting in an office, I would call it a walk and talk. So my colleague and I would literally walk and talk. Most days I was in scrubs, and we would walk through and the person would do their reports. I would ask their questions, and then there was a daily huddle going on in a unit. We would sit down and take in 15 minutes on what's working, what's not working. And ever so often, you will always pick up a nugget that you wouldn't know sitting in your office. So it's a two for one. You spend time with your colleague, you observe the front lines, and you save 50 emails every week between people.
So you mentioned the idea of a nugget, and that makes a lot of sense. You might spend a couple hours doing it, and you might come away with one nugget. Is it a challenge with this kind of rounding? To be approached by things that are not quite what you're looking for now, sort of lower level, very basic technical things like this battery doesn't work on this, or but some people would say those are just as important. But sometimes you could be approached with things that are not quite at the level you're looking for?
All the time, all the time, because the problem is in the eye of the person facing the not problem, not the solution creator, right? And so if the battery, doesn't hold charge, or I'll tell you the one that comes up the most,
What was that?
my printer doesn't work.
Right.
Okay. Is that a Sev one in any organization? No, it's not a Sev one. But if you actually notice the chaos that happens when a printer doesn't work, you cannot discharge on time. You cannot write, and as much as we say we're 100% electronic, we have a lot of paper in our
Yes.
industry,
Yeah.
right? So when a printer doesn't work, it's like it's you get into the conversation with the nurse or the therapist in the department. Once upon a time, I was technical enough that I could actually fix the printer. I would not back myself anymore to do that. But the very fact that I can listen and then call up somebody and hand it over to follow the process. You don't want to abuse your title to create a parallel process. That's the other important thing. You have to guide the people to follow the process.
Uh-huh.
Then you turn around to the person who's fixing it to say, how do we make sure that we do preventive maintenance that the printer doesn't go down, or we know the printer is down before somebody else calls up. And I'll leave you with this. Happened a couple of months ago. I was rounding, and it started with the printer doesn't work. And after a while, the conversation ended by saying, we shouldn't be printing these things because they're available for electronic transmissions.
Hmm.
So it can start with a paper cut or a tactical change, but it can lead to a more strategic discussion and changes a workflow with the right people involved.
Great points, and I like the point about parallel process. You got to put it into the normal workflow of the fix. You can't say no problem, we'll take care of that, because then they say, hey, listen, hold all your problems, and when Chero comes walking around, here he
Yeah.
comes,
Yeah.
here he
And we do
comes.
have teams that round every day. So
Yeah.
so that also happens, but that's exactly the behavior you don't want to propagate. So
Yeah, very good point. Um, I've been thinking a lot about a patient experience as well lately in the interviews I'm doing with people and as a patient on occasion. Um, and perhaps the disconnect sometimes that happens between the implementation of a technology that patients have to deal with, and perhaps that not being the most pleasurable experience. And there can be a disconnect there. When you round, you mentioned you're engaging with your employees, the clinicians. How do we do that as well for the patients? How do we make sure that the tools we're putting in front of the patients are pleasant to use and not just that they look fancy and nice and they were a really cool IT solution, but we perhaps never might want to use them ourselves?
So I'll answer it in two parts, Anthony. One is the direct technology interaction with the patient. And the second one, I'll say the indirect impact of technology that the patient faces even without using the technology. The first one is I'm a big fan of human centered design. You have to design the systems in a way that the layperson can understand it. Healthcare can be very scary.
Yeah.
As I said before, right? You don't get up in the morning and say, "All right, let me look at my patient portal and look for my vitals." Nobody does that. You may look for your Delta or your Alaska Airlines portal and see if there is a deal going on for next weekend, but nobody does that in healthcare. Okay, so in healthcare, presenting data in a form that it is consumable and understandable by the patient at one of their most vulnerable times in their life is very important. And so understanding how you consume your information about your loved one versus I consume about myself are two different. In healthcare, needs to understand that standardization is important, but no two humans have the same DNA. So we have to present the information in a way you can consume and not overwhelm you. So that's the piece with the patient. The second part I would say is everything we do should be focused around patient care. We had this conversation at my team meeting the other day. A cash register in the cafeteria goes down. Okay. You would go, okay, that's like going to a fast food center and your cash register goes down. Well, if the cash register goes down, and most human beings tend to have lunch between the hours of 11 and 1,
Hmm.
the line backs up. When the line backs up, the poor caregiver who has 15 minutes to grab
Right.
a break and a lunch in a 12-hour shift now takes 25 minutes. That means somebody has to spend extra time on the bed. You see, a
Mhm.
cash register also has to be tied back to what does this mean for the patient. When you design systems with how do I link this to the patient in 3 hops or less, it changes your mindset from technology to solutions.
Very good, very good. Governance and the idea of governance. Even though you're a very, very large organization, we have there's still many more things that to do than probably resources to do them. So, how do you think about governance in terms of uh, letting the health system, the leadership of the health system define the things you're going to be working on? You know, we don't want IT to get out front and be running IT projects, but neither do we want to be just order takers. We want to bring a leadership level there, and it's sort of that mix of leading and supporting. So, what are your thoughts around that?
So you just use those words, right? Order takers. So I put our services in the spectrum of order taker. Then somewhere there you have a utility player, and at the highest nirvana state is one of a value enabler.
Mm,
Reality is, depending on the service you provide, you're across the spectrum. The more important thing out there is in governance, and I'm setting the governance for Providence IT as I'm settling into the role, is to ensure that our partners and our stakeholders also understand where we are in the spectrum. The reality is, no governance and no industry has all the resources to do all the things one wants to do. If demand equals supply all the time, then we wouldn't need management. That's simple.
that's
Okay.
good. Good point.
Right. So governance comes in not just to say what we are doing, but also agreeing on what we're not going to do and why not out there. It is a very hard thing to say no, but a true no is much better than a fake yes, in my words, out there. So as we come together as an organization at Providence, there are two levels of governance, right? There are certain things as we come together as a system, we have to agree to do things in a certain way across all our 7 states. However, having said that, healthcare is also very local. Our certain population expectations in Southern California may be very different than Alaska out there. So we also have to take the local governance to meet the needs of the local ministries and also support local regulations. There are many regulations in California that's very different than Oregon. So governance is it's a two-part thing, no different than a federal and a state level governance, if I can
Mm.
draw the analogy without getting into the politics of it. So that's one piece of it. And governance is incomplete without an operating model. Governance talks about the what and the why we do things. The operating model to me is the how and when we do things. And I'm a big proponent of creating an operating model because otherwise we will be rolling out technologies, and we talked about this before, and inadvertently we will be creating more tension, more burden on our caregivers who just tend to get overwhelmed with more technology sometimes.
Right, right. So we want to be careful with that. You know, you mentioned the idea of sort of systemness, right? You're a large system. You want some uniformity there of practice, some things to be consistent across the system. There's got to be some degree of systemness, right? And then there's that local autonomy where there's some areas where it makes sense, either legally or for whatever reasons, to allow uniqueness in the regions. This seems to be a general issue in different parts of healthcare, both in what we just discussed, but also it can come down to even the idea of orders and notes and the way physicians are documenting and things like that. I've talked to people about this idea of notes consistency and Epic. You're an Epic shop, and this idea of Epic Foundation and staying close to Foundation so that the higher levels of AI that Epic's implementing can be used. The more you have personalization and customization around things like notes, the more difficult it becomes for AI to act upon that data at higher levels. But we do personalization and customization because it's pleasing to the user, right? It makes it more user friendly when I can make it how I want to make it. There's a tension there. What are your thoughts around this in light of data and sort of AI?
So I'll address the practice, the behavior side, and then back into the AI. So nothing works on a single axis. Nothing is absolutely right or wrong on that scale of personalization. So the way I've always looked at it is when you think of the word variations, what's your variations in the product, right? If you're using one product to do one thing, you're lucky. In many cases, most organizations have five things to do the same thing.
Right.
So it's not even just Epic or Cerner or pick an EMR of your choice, but even within that, you may have four different systems in out there. So if there is a product variation, know why do you have a product variation. The second part is what I call the practice variation. A practice variation may be deliberate, driven by regulation or something or a personal preference, but know the difference, why you're doing it. Many a case, you will hear somebody say, well, I did it because that's the way my previous organization made me do it, right? So know the reason for that practice variation. And the third one, which as an organization or as an industry, I should say, Anthony, we can all learn from, is performance variation. Okay. And so when you take product, practice, and performance variation, it leads to a very interesting dialogue. So if you are doing something better with a variation, well, why can't that become the new standard? It
Hmm.
forces the question to ask. But often we don't have the data on the performance variation to come back and do that, right? And let's also face it, today in 2025, we live in a different world than 15 years ago, when through the High Tech Act, there was this rollout of EMRs, the adoption of EMRs just took up in a whole different way. What we Nobody did this with a bad intent, but what we did as an industry was we took our paper practice and we converted it to an electronic medium. You don't use your iPhone the way you would do a rotary phone. We don't. Most people don't even remember a rotary phone, but we change it differently, right? An iPhone today is not just a phone, it is a platform that enables 50 other things.
Right.
Our system, we have to change from that paper world, which was very transactional, very episodic, to a platform where you're not just dealing with the patient sitting across the table from you during that clinic visit, but it has to capture enough information without creating a burden on the caregiver or the patient that 6 months from now, someone can send an alert to the patient to say, we've done some analysis, you should come in for a test.
Hmm.
You have to start thinking long term out there. And I'm yet to find a lot of physicians, and I'll call them out in particular, that with the right rationale, they will not change over to that standard template or foundation or things like that. But you have to have that performance and practice variation conversations with them. Without that, it is IT's making me do that. Never works.
Right. Right. All right. So a couple things came to mind as you were talking there. One is the idea of that I've discussed with people about um, the attempt to lay new technology or better technology on existing workflows often doesn't work. They don't match up well. Usually for the proper use or to get the most out of the new technology, you really have to redesign the workflow. And there's places that have the bandwidth and capacity and innovation hubs and innovation labs and innovation wards to do that. So, it's working out. But this laying of new technology on old process sometimes it doesn't yield what you hope it will yield. What are your thoughts around that dynamic?
I'm smiling, and I honestly don't remember who told me this over a dozen years ago, but it was a simple equation that was OO plus NT equals COO. Okay, write it down. OO
Right?
plus NT equals COO.
Uh-huh.
And what it stands for is old organization plus new technology equals costly old organization.
There you
I
go.
did not make it up. I don't remember where I heard it, but that is a principle that I've held to heart because that's exactly what you said, right? We can take all the new technology and plop it in the middle, and it creates more disruption than better outcomes. The unintentional consequences are because of that not understanding the problem you're trying to solve. So in this day and age, especially as you're moving to standardization or reduced variations, it is imperative to state the obvious that in many cases, the workflow has to change in order to accept this new technology. It's like propping a new organ in your body. The entire body changes when somebody gets an organ transplant. I keep going back to healthcare examples. It's not just the organ that has to adapt, the entire human body has to adapt to the new organ. So when
Hmm.
technology comes in and pops, the creator of the technology holds the responsibility to ensuring that the workflow doesn't break. And which is why you have these partnerships built upfront. And many organizations, when in the epic language, what's called refuel, when
Yes.
they go through refuel, my previous organization, we went through refuel, is you have to go back and redesign the workflows to accept the new technology. But you have to make sure you understand that you leave it with better outcomes than where you started with, otherwise it backfires.
Right.
The second word you used was innovation. Innovation is one of our pillars, our strategic direction for 2030. The third pillar is called focus innovation for positive change. Innovation is often confused with invention. No, innovation doesn't have to be creating 50 new things every day. Innovation can be taking five things and rejiggering the puzzle for a better output. Imitation sometimes
Yeah.
leads to better outcomes than inventions. I'm a creator, I'm a programmer. Back in the day, even now, I do a lot of tech stuff, but that's my hobby. I don't
Mm.
just create new things because I can. And with the newer models of AI, it's become so much easier to create new things.
Right.
But you always have to ask the question, what positive change am I driving through
Right.
this piece? So,
Excellent. You know, when you're talking about workflow, makes me think that I feel like this has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. That the discussion used to be that workflow was absolute, at least how it seemed to me, it was expressed. Workflow was sacred. Clinical workflow was sacred. And anytime you were talking about technology, it had to conform to the workflow. That discussion has changed now. And you're not the only person who's saying it, but that discussion has changed to the idea of workflow must evolve in order to fit some of these technologies. It's totally different.
yeah, and I would say that's not a positive or a negative reason for that conversation. 15 years ago, Anthony, think of an ED. EDs used to be overstaffed, overworked, I would say. But there's a concept of what's called borders in an ED. We would look at our daily reports, and every day our daily reports would be in single digits, even for a large hospital system. I'm not talking Providence, I'm talking generally. Today, after COVID, where we don't have enough workforce and we have a plethora of people that need more care, rarely do you find a day when you don't have borders. The exception has become the new rule. And the EDs across the country have actually changed their workflows to adapt to just
Right.
borders being a state of normalization. And so technology also has to now change to that new workflow. So you always have to be careful. I use the words technology to lead, partner, and enable. There are three different words: lead, partner, enable, with workflow out there. Some days technology leads, some days workflow leads. As long as that three-legged dance is working and both parties know what we're doing, the end is positive. So
Yeah. Very good. Let's talk a little bit about what is probably one of the biggest issues in healthcare IT is system availability. Not much else matters, as you mentioned, the cash register, but not much else matters if the tools are down. I would argue, I'll just give you a position and then you can react to it that the tools that the caregivers use have become the applications have become so integrated and critical to the practice of medicine that it essentially is, let's say, close to impossible to practice medicine without them. And I feel like we're evolving slowly from this idea of we have to figure out how to revert to paper, which I think has become almost impossible to revert to paper in any kind of manageable way or reasonable way, in my opinion. I just don't think. I think it's too much of a dramatic shift, and therefore the discussion seems to have evolved to resiliency and redundancy, meaning we're going to get breached, the systems are going to go down, but we have to figure out how to fail over to other electronic systems. We have to keep the systems available somehow, some way. Um, they just can't go away. What are your thoughts around that, and how do you manage that in your if you agree with that, disagree? Obviously, uptime still going to be important to you. With the key people that you're working with, your CISO, you're head of infrastructure, emergency management. Like that's a it's probably a big part of what you're thinking or what's in the back of your head a lot.
Well, I don't think there's a CIO in this country that doesn't stay awake at night thinking with those thoughts, and I'm no different. Redundancy and resiliency is an expectation, and redundancy and resiliency also comes with a pretty high sticker tag
Right.
in terms of capital. So it's always balancing the need with the size of our wallet, to state the obvious. I'll tell you, there are different forms of redundancy and resiliency, right? I mean, you can have a backup device, you can have a red port, you can do this, you can do that. But earlier this week, one of the three largest cloud providers in the country had a
Yes.
major issue. Okay. So what do you do in terms of resiliency for that? Are you going to have contracts with two or three different things, which many of us call vendor diversification?
Uh-huh.
Vendor diversification is also a form of resiliency, that you don't put your eggs in one basket.
Right.
And 15 minutes ago, we talked about rationalization and moving to standardization. So this is the dichotomy where we have to find the balance in doing certain things, because just in case requires a lot of money that we don't have. So
That's
the
right.
way the way I've tried to drive these conversations is balance just in case with just in time. Some things are easier than the others, and we will build it. Unfortunately, we live in a world where even today, bridges collapse, planes go down, and technology takes a hiccup.
Yeah.
Where I worry about, Anthony, is today there is a generation of caregivers on our front lines that just don't know how to use paper. That's
Exactly.
not their fault. That's not their fault. Okay. And so the term that we have coined in our industry is business continuity, right? How does the business continue to go on? Because things like this will happen. And our downtime procedures that were designed 15 years ago, you and I remember the days where it was like, oh, your EMR is going to have an upgrade this weekend. It's going to be down for 12 hours. Our downtime was designed for those things.
Right.
We were not designed for a cyber activity for 15 days.
Right.
Not designed when your time scheduling system goes down for 10 days, right? And so that business continuity planning, in my book, is one of my top five priorities. Setting across, so working with my colleague, the chief operating officer, we're starting to roll out a plan. And like everything else, it requires time and resources that we have to beg, borrow, steal from other places. But that's a non-negotiable, because it's a matter of when, not if, those things happen.
Yeah, it's a great stuff there. Interesting that you mentioned your COO as being, it makes a lot of sense. I just haven't thought of that a lot. I usually have these discussions and the context would be working with the CISO and emergency management. But tell me more about, in your mind, is that a key individual that other CIOs need to be interacting with regarding business continuity, and anyone else come to mind?
Yeah, so at a very high level, those other roles are not excused from the work. And so if you think of this, it's a three-legged stool. The CISO and the technology team, when these things happen, are very focused on bringing back, I'll use the word servers and databases for lack of simplicity. So they are working on the technical piece of bringing this back, reconfiguring devices and things like that. My chief risk officer is very involved in guiding us on what not to do given the constraints in which we are working. And this year, risk qualification and your risk quantification comes
Hmm.
into play. But the bulk of the work is being done by frontline caregivers, the operations folks. If we don't teach them how to do this, how are they going to ever do the work? So risk is doing their part, IT is doing their part, but the who resides in that middle category, and which is why the CO becomes a key partner in this game. I've done this before. I will tell you, it's the only way it works, because you cannot get ownership and accountability until you bring in the people and the leaders who's going to bear the brunt of that pain when things don't work.
And under the COO would be all the chief medical officer, and then spreads
Yeah,
out.
across the
Yeah.
board. In my
Yeah.
case, I'm privileged. I am lucky that my COO is a physician, so I get a two for one
Okay.
in that relationship as well. But yeah, spot on. Yeah.
All right, Chero, we're almost out of time. We could probably speak for another 2 hours, but I won't do that to you. Let me get a final word of advice to you now. You know, you're in rarefied territory, one of the biggest health systems in the country. There aren't too many that are bigger. Um, you know, I would like to ask you, I would think this is an interesting question comes to mind. Now, you to your this would be to your CIO colleagues, to your IT director colleagues out there, to people aspiring to the next level in their career and think they're ready for a bigger organization and ready to take on a bigger challenge. I would imagine some people might have a little fear and say a little nervousness and say, I don't know if I can do it. It's big. It's big. You've taken on one of the biggest roles in the country. You seem quite comfortable on our talk today, so God bless you with that. That's good. That's nice to see. What would your advice be, or words of comfort or encouragement to those that are just nervous to take on something bigger than they're in?
Um, I would go back to something I said before. We live and operate in an industry where pain is supreme. So when we work in an industry of pain, a little fear and a little pain for ourselves is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
Hmm.
One of my mentors always used to tell me, be comfortable in being uncomfortable.
Hmm.
It's a line that I often share now that you and I have the same hairstyle. Now that I'm old and, you're old when people ask you to mentor, they were like, wow, when did that happen? So
Yeah.
I use that line a lot. Be comfortable in being uncomfortable. A little fear makes you push a little further out because we can all get a little complacent in our comfort zones, right? It's the same reason why I go out and round. It's the
Mm,
same reason why I haven't done this yet out here, but I would sit in patient family advisory councils. Think of when you go in as a patient and the fear you have. Okay. As an employee, as a caregiver, I should also have that little fear in myself to say, can I go out an extra step or run an
mm.
extra mile so that I can reduce the fear of the hundreds and thousands of people that visit my ministries? Healthcare is a calling.
Yeah.
Fear is a form of calling to challenge you to do a greater good. And I'll leave it by saying this: back yourself. Back yourself. If you don't back yourself, why would others back you? Do I have an answer to every question that comes up? No. But I back myself that I have a great team, a great set of stakeholders. Bury your ego and go and tell them, I don't know. Can you
Yeah.
tell me how to approach this problem? So I've always surrounded myself with people that don't hold it as a punitive action when you go and say, I don't know how to do it. And that creates, a sort of a antidote to fear.
I think that's brilliant. And I think it absolutely makes sense. And I think that's good advice for folks out there. So, Chero, I want to thank you. This was an absolute pleasure. I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I hope we can catch up again down the road.
Thanks again for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.